Hi and welcome back. I finally managed to get a moment to run through these slides that I had put together while I was making the construction drawings dated April 19th. Some of this is probably irrelevant, but my assumption is that this project is still going to hopefully go forward, and so this might be relevant to, and if we get pushed back from the county, it might be relevant to an engineer. I don't know. But I'm going to run through these pretty rapidly. And I had worked with these steps and that bit there for a while before I arrived at the final version shown in the plans, which shows this wall here is just a standard foundation wall. But by the time I get to the end of this ends up showing this as a standard. This one has a 5-foot radius and this one has a 4'9" radius, standard foundation walls. And if we push this, and you'll see in the project during the construction drawings, this already moved out an additional 3 inches for reasons out here at the porch and the door and those little columns. But if we move to another 3, then you end up with a 5-foot radius on this one and a 5-foot radius on this one. And the reason that might be significant is that that's the smallest radius that regular forms like Simon's flex form system will go down to a 5-foot radius. So if they keep this at 4'9", it'll have to be hand built. But maybe they're going to hand build everything. There's an 8-foot radius out there at the corner. And I had shown that reinforcement, but this is the way to do the reinforcement. And then this was the framing out here at this bit here, and originally I was showing this blocking all the way down through here. But it only needs to be at the locations where it's shown braced wall panel, which essentially is 2 on this side and 2 on that side. And out here these 2 were just, I believe, this porch ceiling and how that's treated, whether with that extra piece of trim or not. And I think in the plan I show this, or in the drawings I show this. And you could raise that porch ceiling up to the 8'3" if you wanted to, but it's kind of a small space for that. But it can be, you could step this up another, whatever that is, you could step that up the extra 7 or 8 inches and raise that little porch ceiling if you wanted to. Don't forget we have this issue with the interface of these. But this was just how that was originally. And this is where the porch is pouring through against that one. These things end up sitting on the foundation. These ledgers end up sitting on the foundation, but they are going to want something so that they don't, as if they would, so that they don't lift up out of there. And originally I was showing something like this with this rigid XPS out here. But the upshot of all of these slides, all those slides, is shown on the plans. Whatever I ended up with the plans, at the plans is what I needed to end up at the end. Out here, this is at the patio foundation, and I guess you would have a choice if you wanted to put like 1-inch XPS in here and maybe just pour that all the way through and against that. That's, the concrete person would know more about what is going to work. That brick has to be removed in order for us to build this wall on this side, to do the reinforced wall on this side. So the brick has to be removed to the top of the foundation, and then once that framing's done, I guess there's a decision on whether that concrete is poured through or this is just brought up and then brick is laid up on top of it. That would be the alternative. This is how this is out here, where that slab edge is flush with the foundation edge, because all this grade comes up above even the bottom of that slab. If that slab, I'm showing that slab thickened out, looks like to almost 8 inches here. It only needs to be 4 coming in here. So these are trusses, and I have this added on the bottom so that this ends up equaling 7 1/4, so that fly rafter can be 7 1/4. And then you have this is looking up on the soffit from the open patio side. And this is how I'm showing it with this beaded stuff coming down and over, but you could just use a solid piece of wood there. I think it ends up about 3 inches wide, but that would be up to you. Now this next section is with regard to how I ended up adding that 3 inches here, and you can see why it was needed. So it was driven by this facade here and not the foundation, even though at the foundation I had all this rigmarole going on, and then I just got rid of that and went to a straight curved foundation wall, albeit a 4'9" outside radius, and 5 foot would allow you to use that Simon's flex form if that's what your contractor uses. So this was this 324, and we moved it that 3 inches, which really helped a lot. For 3 inches, that helped quite a bit here, as you can see. So that was why that happened there, why that extra 3 inches was added. And then I adjusted this door. I mean, that's shown, that's what it's happened. Adjusted the sidewalk, and ultimately adjust this window as well in some fashion or another. But down here, that's what we end up with. We had all this rigmarole. We just got rid of that and went to that. And so another 3 inches. If you wanted to go to 5 foot outside radius here, to just keep rehashing that, you could do that as well. And then you would have a little bit more margin in here. Not that that's really critical. It looks like it's just fine. And that's the final adjustment on that window there, to keep these corners square or the same dimension. And next, I worked on fixing up all these soffits. This soffit here was down to almost 0, and this was a couple inches. So I worked on fixing up various of these soffits back here and at the end. I had that one as 14 inches, and that goes out to closer to 17 inches, and this develops a soffit as well, at least a 4-inch soffit or so. I guess these were just the outside photographs at that point before I finished these construction drawings. This was where we were, where I was at that point, which was on the 1st of April. I'm glad you went back to those 3 windows here. You were right, that did look good. And this, I think I published some plans to you before the 19th. Yes, I did. And yeah, there was quite a bit that had to be added after that fact. I think we returned to this roof, but we had a couple choices with framing this whole second floor. Remember, our new roof framing is going to start right here. We're just going to take all that off and reframe this all with 2x8s. So our choices were to put a beam up here and have it here and carry it down to the foundation below that way, or provide enough lateral restraint that this can just act as a ridge board. I opted for the latter of those two options, and you'll see the reason here in a moment or two. And this program itself calculates those valley beams just its own self. I do it myself. Sometimes I do it myself, but this does it, and it always comes out similar. And this was the valley rafter. We had mid-span bearing way back here. This is the first thing I tried with those valley rafters, is to have mid-span bearing like that. And when I did that, one piece of 2x10 would do it. Terrific. But that load at the middle is 2,000, and it's coming down there and there. Coming in now on May 1st, I'm going to interject and say a couple things. First of all, those members up there, that valley rafter will be doubled 2x10s at least anyway, just to provide good nailing surface for the drywall and corner bead. But I'm going to revisit the valley rafter with that midspan support back there instead of where I ended up with it, because I didn't even try it then and went forward as this film will show, and I'm going to revisit that, and I'll let you know during this film whether beam K changes and those valley rafters change to something different, and I'll update the plans if that's the case. So I moved that to a clear span. I tried to do it in a clear span, and the only way it can be done in a clear span is to go to LVLs, to go to two 9.5 inch LVLs, and those are beveled on the bottom so that you can just run your drywall right to them. So that was what I did there, where those are clear span all the way up to here. But then it was a case of supporting that up there, this end. And I might not even know what I'm talking about, to be honest, but it became a case of supporting it up at that end. So the reason I didn't consider making that a ridge beam instead of a ridge board is because the bearing at this end has nowhere to go but there, and that comes down there below, which is why I kept that as a ridge board and tried to design around that. And so what I ended up doing is leaving that as a ridge board and then running these rafters down to the top of this wall here and providing midspan support here and here for these two valley rafters. That makes those valley rafters lighter than the LVLs at the end, and they go down to that, which is a lot lighter of a member, should be less expensive, to the 1.3 LSLs. And then we know we don't need this big heavy beam up here because we're not going to do anything with supporting anything up there. We're going to rely on our strong backs down here to resist the thrust at the wall. So now I have these valleys rafters being supported here as a midspan support. Getting rid of those and just using a double 2x8 just to stiffen that. And that's where those two loads come down. And the upshot of that is shown on the plans, what we needed to end up with, which was 3 of these LVLs, 8-inch LVLs. And these ones up here are a little bit of a lighter member, but that is for those other rafters that are coming down on the second floor. Those also have a midspan support. So out in this room, we really don't have to worry too much about wall thrust, but nevertheless the strong backs are shown, and that increased the load. This K, which this is the sad part of this. This is what it took to get that load down from the second floor. Where this is the cost of that, I guess, is these 3 LVLs, which are probably 28 feet long, 16 here and 12 here. So yeah, those are pretty long, 3 of them, and these 2 LSLs here. Otherwise all that framing would be pretty much similar, but that's what it took to get that load down from that second floor roof. Now maybe we can endeavor to make a beam situation up there instead, if that is going to be more economical. But this is the sort of thing I wanted to cover going through here, because that had to increase in size as well. Out here I looked at this fireplace just to make sure I was on the right path with that, and the result of that is shown in the plans, how that turns out and goes out the back like that on that side. I presume you can do that on either side, but I have it out there, and I didn't really like that chunky downspout there, but it has to, the other place would be at this end, you know, coming down on this face of the column and going out, or on the front face of it and going out if you wanted that to get that out of that corner. And all the result of this, and then after I drew those plans, I recognized that they're going to wanted me, that they would want me to show the braced wall panels, the locations. And every wall, except the shortest of walls, require 2 of these of a certain length, depending on a variety of factors. And the results of all that is shown on the plans. I will say, with regard to this wall here, you don't need this many of them on this wall. But this is a braced wall panel just by nature of the fact that you're going to be nailing sheeting on it anyway. But if you use 8-foot sheeting on this one here, you have to have cross blocking here. It can be flat 2x4s across, but at the horizontal joints, and those horizontal joints have to occur somewhere in in here somewhere. Oh, this was just all this braced wall panel, and you saw that what the result of that was. This is at that front north facade of the entry, and where that top wall, that attic wall above, sits further back, quite a bit further back than this. And this is how this is done with, that's a piece of PVC or aluminum clad wood or whatever, water table up there. It is dying in and flushing, and you can figure out something else, but that's how I'm showing it. It's dying in and flushing with the bottom of that horizontal soffit. And this is how it's put together up here. So to be a little more clear, I want to cover this roof plan one more time. One of the things I did was arrange to try to work out all the 24 inches on center. And the only thing that looks like a problem is this last ceiling joist here. These pink ones are the ceiling joists. So that last one would have to just be bumped out a ½ inch. Otherwise, everything lines up as you see here, with the pink ones being the ceiling joists. And these orange ones are coming down from a ridge board, and they do not bear on this mid-span wall here. These are clear span. That's why they are Southern Pine number 1. And they're going all the way down to here and coming on those floor joists. And then these plankers, these blue ones, are the doubled ones that are coming down beside the dormer and beside these skylights, necessary anyway for those skylights. And those can be just SPF, but when those come down, those also, they do not bear on these. Those are clear span. Those blue ones are clear span. Those double blue ones are clear span, allow no bearing at that skylight wall. Those come all the way down and bear on the first floor wall, the 8-foot, 4.5 first floor wall. But they have this whole strong back construction here to restrain them from wanting to push out. And so to return to that roof plan, that's what's happening with the blue ones and the orange ones. So I don't think we have a restraint problem here. Well, let's look at these ones here on A7. On the north side of the wall, on the north side of the office exercise wall, those rafters bear on that wall. And that's why we needed this B1J here, is because we're picking that up there. So we don't have to worry about lateral restraint there, really. But nevertheless, we still show those strong backs at that location as well, here and here. But these ones here, these intermediate ones, are bearing on that wall here. Here they're not bearing on this wall, they're just going into the bottom of that valley rafter. And then we just have these short rafters coming down to that wall, just to finish all this valley out here. So that, hopefully that explains that roof plan a little more for whomever might need it. And I did not, this is all based on what they need for this Velux opening. I wanted to show that at the final version, that I believe that space between these two double blue ones is 30 3/4. I can't be sure, but that's all laid out And if you do build this, and I'm really hopeful that you do, feel free to communicate with me and I can measure up anything for you. That's all on that. Okay, the film is currently 20 minutes long, and this was a couple slides that I had skipped through or not even shown earlier in this film. But this was something I encountered when I was putting together construction drawings, and I knew that I needed to return to it, so I have now, and I'm going to try to run through what I was thinking then and why I returned to it. And what I was thinking then had to do with the height of these beams and the width of them, etc. And I had started that. Then I came back to work with this wall here first, because there were a couple things I wanted to do or look at. And this is these switches. You need a couple probably coming into that room. But you could move those over to that side, and maybe you only need one of those. Maybe this is a fourplex here. But one or the other of those is probably needed. But the reason I came in here was all about these beams, and I ran through a number of, and this is the one I actually ended up liking, something like, not quite like this. I like this in the very end of all the different interpretations because of the different things that came into play. This is what I liked the most if we were going to convert that door from that traditional look there to this, and we have one of these similar beams at each end. You can just see I'm working with the switch over here. This is looking down the hall, and we had this one at the end is taller than the two intermediate ones. Actually, it's taller than all three of those ones that precede it. And I at first tried to make that the same height as those, but it looked far too weak from inside. You'll see when I go through those interior photos as quickly as I can. I wanted to look at a little bit more at this hallway and getting it married into this kitchen. And I thought first that might work, but it didn't. One thing I did do, and I think it should probably make it into the plans, is I made those windows a couple inches smaller, since that's a standard available size, and took them down to 23 inches from 25. I just like that less crowded look a little better, the more tall look. So then I was looking from this way at this alignment. This is the big one out by the breezeway, and the two intermediate ones. I'm kind of reluctant to make them as tall as these others, or I was kind of reluctant, and that was when I first tried that, and that really wasn't going to work because the photos at the end, this big one is the only one that works at this end. So what I ended up doing was, this one of course is big, I left that one just aligned with that one, and then the third one down here made the same thickness as these, and then these are the two intermediate ones that are shorter. And I messed around a little bit with the alignment on these doors with relation to those beams, and those were all shown as 28-inch doors. There's actually room, if you just wanted to make them all 30, there's room to do that, and I'll run through these floor plan bit here in a minute. And here it is. So this was, I was trying to get this doorway out from underneath this beam here, but of course that's pretty symmetrical, so it doesn't really help. And so then I rotated this and brought that in like that, and that, I just squeezed this a little bit more too. That's where I brought those two flanking doors to 30 inches, left the bathroom one at 28, but then went to 30s on all of them. And so you have, this is 18-inch deep shelving here now, and I used hooks in here and your shelves and rods back here, but you could do whatever you like, of course. But I did want to look at those beams, and we go through these other ones. I'm pleased with, if you were going to convert it, I think the way to convert it, I'll show you the way I think you should do it. If you make this doorway here kind of more in line with the doorway across, kind of bring all this space together, and that's how it is at the end. And then these are these photos with with regard to those changes at this doorway here. And so really you could just leave it alone. You can still look at some of the other stuff I did out there if you like, but you can just leave this doorway alone if you like. But when I first encountered it, I was wondering whether it shouldn't be more something like this. And that, I just didn't think that was going to work, even though this is the same height as all those ones down through there. I personally didn't think it worked from out here. And there was continuing to be an argument in my head whether there should be maybe a slab up there at each end. But I'm good with it either way. Even when I finalize what happens here, it's kind of a toss-up to me. And this gives a better look, because there's a lot of tension. Once I put this together, there's a lot of tension here and here between this door lintel. When I go up, first this is just those. So that's that. I had shown half beams before, if you recall. Now these are just, one slab of wood, 1 3/4 or 7/8 thick piece of wood against there to trim off that ceiling, if nothing else. But that's not needed. And I think I ultimately ended up liking something like this the best. Come back through to it. I liked this the best of everything. I didn't mind this tension here. And looking from this was what we had with your existing drawing plans like they are now, where this hallway is kind of separated from that whole kitchen, which is fine if that's what you are looking for. But then this is that big one at the end. And that one it wasn't working to me. So that's how it stays on this side. And then this was how we had this at this end with this real wide one. And we just got rid of that so that we could make it tall also, like that one at the head. So now you have these 3 tall ones, 1, 2, 3, going down through there. Definitely like it without it. I mean, from this angle here, I definitely like it without it, without those flanking slabs of wood. And I definitely like this with the bigger one instead of this lighter one to match those. But I went to this because that's what we have kind of here. So I really liked how that worked there. So okay, so hopefully this didn't make the film too much longer, but I'm now satisfied I've covered every part that I should cover. This was kind of a critical piece down through here, and I prefer it like this. I don't know if this picture's, I guess that's as good as it gets. I noticed the slate floor went away in the entry, but we know that is going to be slate. So I figured out where the slate went and put that in, and then I made one final move up here, which should have been made much sooner, but that is now it's identical to what's happening over here. And then the last thing, if this tension here is just too close, this shows that that door is 3'6", almost 3'7", and this brings it down to 3'0" between here and here. And I guess any point between that, because this is it here. The only thing is that this whole wall here is flat or flush or whatever all the way through here. And if you make that door smaller, I suppose you can make it smaller and push it that way and still leave it that way, but that's not going to relieve that tension here. So if you do want to make it smaller, if you want to do that, you're going to have some sort of a stub wall here, and I don't see you putting one down here to match. I don't think that's a big deal, but it's up to you which way you want to go with that. And then the last thing with regard to that slate, I keep forgetting to mention it. This floor is put together this way so that you can have that substrate for the slate and the thickness of the slate itself, whatever you need to within reason. because you can drop this whole 2x8 floor system down 2 inches and still be suspended. This just becomes a 2x8 ledger at this end, and the slate though would break here because those beams stay there. And that's it. That's the end of the film, the end of the review. And I'm glad that I came back and addressed this whole corridor through here, because I think it's important, regardless of which way you go. I think it's important that that transition be included, because this door is going to get used probably more than this one. And one last thing, and my parting thought then would be with regard to this cabinet here. And this one's kind of automatically would set up like this, and you don't have one that's opening toward the sink in that permutation there. So I changed that like that. And I mean, I would also recommend that make it in the plan. Just from an aesthetic, I like it, but from a functional standpoint, it's also much better. And I think that will be it. Thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure returning to it. I guess the only question, I guess you could make those as tall as these. That might be the only remaining question. But okay, that's it. I really hope this gets built. If not, it's been an amazing time. And that's all. Thank you very much.